Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffiths. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffiths, and this podcast is ranked in the top 2% of the most popular podcasts globally. And it's because of my guest. I am honored and blessed. I'm honored and blessed to share time with people who are at the top of their game, and they're showing up here. They are willing to help you to get to where you want to be in life and in business. And our topic today is the art of conscious conversations, transforming how we talk, listen, and interact. I'm going to have a hard time, Chuck. It's Monday. Just
It's
bear
okay.
with me.
Monday.
That's right.
With my guest, it'll happen.
With my guest, Chuck Wisner. He has been here before, but it's been a while. So Chuck is an author, a consultant, and a communication expert specializing in leadership and organizational strategy. His 2022 book, The Art of Conscious Conversations, which I just mentioned, is a practical guide to improving, again, how we talk, listen, and interact. But this is both personally and professionally. I don't know why people say, oh, it's a work-life balance. No, it's all the same thing as far as I'm concerned. So if you're talking with somebody personally or professionally, you need to be on top of your game. So with over 30 years of consulting experience and a background in mediation with Harvard's mediation program, Chuck focuses on the power of language to transform relationships. He is a coach and a speaker focusing on what he says is the lost art of conversations. I don't disagree with him. His theories of the why, the how, and what of conversations dive deeply into their DNA. Write that down because we're going to talk about that. And introduce new tools and practices that transform how we can think about and be in these conversations far more successfully than we may have been in the past. And this is important. His book outlines 4 key conversation types. 1, storytelling. 2, collaborative. 3, creative. And 4, commitment. And he is offering strategies for mindful, intentional communication that fosters understanding and better outcomes. And he joins us today to break down these 4 archetypal elements. I'm going to laugh at myself of each conversation and their significance. Good morning, Chuck, and welcome back to Your Partner in Success Radio. And thank you for sending me your book. It's in front of me as we speak. But before we get, it's a good book.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I remember when we talked last time, I said, you've got to come back. It's been a couple years, but you made it back.
Yep.
So before we get started, it has been a while since you were here last. So tell us a bit about you and how you're showing up in the world these days.
Well, the book has been a journey, writing it, getting it published, and then having it out in the world. I'm basically, I'm doing lots of podcasts and some speaking engagements and taking on a few individual clients here and there. And basically the podcasts are because I really, really want to get the book in more hands because I think many people can benefit from it for their personal life and their business life. So, it's a gentle out there. And as my publisher said, your book is an evergreen book. It's not a one-hit wonder for what's going on in the moment. So I just want to keep it alive.
Talk with you because I do my level best to keep this podcast evergreen, which is, somebody says, oh, I want to come on. I want to talk about my event. Sorry. No.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yes.
Your event is going to be over and done by the time we get to this. But I'm glad you mentioned evergreen because there are so many important points in this book. And listen, I am a highly committed introvert. You know this. I mean, I'm not shy and I don't have a single filter as far as I can tell, but I do need to be left alone. And I'm always thinking and creating, and the strategies that you are offering, or for people, for me, like, we're introverts, but you can be whatever you want. You can be introvert, extrovert, a combination of both. But these conversations are going to fit into whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
So before we get going, and we are talking about the DNA of conversations, tell us what you believe we need to know to understand conversations in a new way. Look, we're out of time all the time. You've got three
Yeah.
seconds to make a point on a website. People are just being lambasted by, look at me, shiny object, pay attention to me.
Yes.
The conversations are so critical. And I
Yes.
think a lot of people say, oh, I can do that online. But what about talking to me? So,
Talking to me. Yeah.
yeah, talk to me. Tell me what's up. So, what do we need to understand?
Well, I think fundamentally, one of the reasons the book was born uh, was through my teaching in corporations, leadership, and consulting, um, and the experience with many, many, many people. Uh, I realized that the things I taught when I studied language and did mediation is that fundamentally people don't understand how conversations work. And there's a reason, there's no fault there, there's no judgment there. We grow up learning to have conversations through our families and our cultures and our belief systems that, our family and culture uh, uh, give us. And so we sort of create these conversational patterns. Some are probably really useful and good, and some are probably not so useful and rather hindering. But we grow up with these patterns that become sort of autopilot. We're in conversation without being aware that we're in conversation. It's like we are fish in water. We're humans in conversation without being aware. And so the book tries to say here are some fundamentals about how they work and why they work, so that we can actually hear them and think about them differently and participate in them in a new way. So it's sort of a new information. It's sort of like distinctions that help us see and and hear differently. I had a teacher once that said if he took me to Alaska for 6 months and we just worked and studied with the Inuits, uh, that we would learn their 20 to 30 names of snow, and because they have different names for specific snow for different reasons. And when we came back to the U.S., I live in New England. I would never see snow the same way because now I have distinctions about snow and words and names and labels about snow that allows me to see it differently. And so that's how I think about these ideas about conversations. It gives us new ways to understand them and see them and hear them. So that's the value of saying
Yeah.
what is the DNA?
And when you said that, I thought of clouds.
Uh-huh.
Because we were taught in school there are different types of clouds, cumulus and rain cloud, just so many different,
Yeah.
and every cloud is different.
Yeah. And without those distinctions, you don't see them the same way. You don't appreciate or see them the same way.
So you said there's four types of conversations and why they matter.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you, it just popped in my head. I wrote it down while you were talking. Conversations don't necessarily need to be voice to voice. We're having conversations through text. We're having
Mm-hmm.
conversations with chat bots. We're having
Mm-hmm.
conversations all the time. But what I have found out or noticed maybe that even if I know I'm talking to a bot or I know I'm talking, to a text,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to generally be able to understand what I'm really saying.
Right.
I'm a bit
Yeah.
snarky. Everybody knows this. Snark doesn't work. Snark
On
doesn't really
text.
work. No, it doesn't. Unless you're a very good friend and then you go, okay, fine. But
Yeah, right, right.
those are conversations, aren't they?
They are, and when you with your snarkiness in the text, there's a spectrum. It can either go, someone won't get it at all, or they'll say, "Oh, you're being a jerk," or it'll get misinterpreted in another way. So there's a lot of room for misinterpretation. Mostly because we're missing the voice. Our emotions come through our bodies and our voice. And so there's this whole dimension of whole body, whole mind sort of piece that plays out in conversations in real time that don't play out in email or text. And so my caution always is when you're in email and text, you're in a different game. So be aware of that and play it differently. And if you have an emotion, you might have to be clear about that instead of assuming that the other person can read your emotion through your text. Yeah.
And I think I learned this from you the last time we spoke. Pick up the phone and have a real conversation. If you feel like
Right.
it may be going sideways or you're getting frustrated or you know good and well you're about to be misunderstood, and the problem with
Mm-hmm.
texts and emails, they can be copied and sent all over the world. Do you really
Yeah.
want that? Pick up
Yeah.
the
And
phone and have a
yeah,
conversation.
yeah, lots of room for misinterpretation is the problem. And in conversations, one of the things I encourage people to do is, you know, re-fall in love with questions, have a love affair with questions. Because in conversations, if you don't understand what someone's saying, or you even don't agree with them, you can ask them, well, help me understand why you're thinking that way. And that's really hard to do in a text and an email. You can do it, but we're missing all those subtleties.
Let's talk about the four types of conversations
Mm-hmm.
and why they matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, so there's four, and storytelling is first. Is the first one for a very good reason. Um, we There's a lovely quote by Muriel Rukeyser. It says, "The world isn't made of atoms; it's made of stories." And we live in stories. We basically have stories about ourselves. We have stories about other people. Uh, we have a part of our brain that when we take in billions of bits of data, signals and data, it sort of takes all that, takes our history and goes, oh, this is how the pieces fit together. Here's a story for you. They wronged you, or they this, or you should do this. And so that's going on unconsciously all the time. But while stories are lovely, and that's how we get to know each other and learn about each other. That's how cocktail parties work. Um, and they're lovely and they can inform us. But there's another side to stories that are the stories that are hindering, the stories that we have about ourselves, self judgment, stories we have about others that really aren't helpful, and they're quite negative. And in a quiet, very quiet way internally, they can be more than negative. They can be really nasty, toxic. So storytelling is primary because if we can do a little bit of work on our stories, understanding them and sharing them in a productive, healthy way, the next conversation is going to go a whole lot better, which is a collaborative conversation. And that's really our ability to put our position out in an open way, be curious about other people's position, learn about different perspectives. And it's a mutual learning conversation that goes much better when we're not stuck in our story, or our ego isn't stuck to our story. Like, it's got to be this way. I'm right. I'm going to this conversation knowing I'm right. And then we can't have any space in our mind or our heart to really absorb the other people. So that's a very different dance, that conversation. It's about, advocacy and inquiry and the tools that help us do that better, and asking good questions. And if you and I are in a conversation collaboratively, what happens is we automatically sort of fall into a creative space where ideas start coming, something that you didn't think of, I didn't think of, but we're saying we could do this or we could do this, and ideas start bubbling up. That's part of the creative conversation. The other part of the creative conversation is that we are so trained to live in the left rational side of our brain, the literal side, that we forget to appreciate and practice our right side, which is the more intuitive, creative, bigger thinker, connect the dots kind of thing. And so there's an art in sort of reacquainting it's there, but we have to reacquaint ourselves with it. So the collaborative and the creative conversations, the middle two conversations. And then finally, the last conversation is called commitment conversations, which really is, it's called that because it's about the promises we make and the actions we take with other people to make things happen. And it's a very powerful conversation. However, we do it often in a very sloppy way. We make promises very quickly. We make promises we regret. We regret. We say yes. Sometimes when we're inside, we're thinking, I don't really want to do that. So that conversation, we break it down into its components to say, wait a minute, we have other options. There's better ways to have that conversation, because ultimately, if you have a better commitment conversation, you're going to make a better decision, and you're also going to have a promise that you can keep, which builds trust. So I just gave you a really quick shorthand of the four
You did.
conversations.
Give me, if you can, maybe a case study, or you're talking about a commitment conversation, and my stomach just clenched because I've done everything you just said. So sure, yeah,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, sure,
crud.
no problem.
Yeah, now how do I get myself out of this mess? But give us, an idea of what a commitment conversation should look like or can look like, so we don't, at the end of the conversation, go, what did I just say I would do? I don't have time. I don't
Yeah,
wanna. Basically, I
yeah.
hear myself, I don't wanna.
Yeah, yeah. And so in the book, there's a diagram that actually diagrams the whole page that just diagrams out how this conversation works. And basically it says every commitment conversation starts only in two ways. In fact, if you look at your emails and your text, there's generally two things that are going on. Somebody either requesting something of you, they're asking for information, they're asking for you to help them, they're asking for you to make a decision, they're asking you something. And the other piece is they're offering something. They're offering you a deal. They're offering to help you. They're offering you information. So that's the root of our commitment conversations: requests and offers. Now, from there, it gets very complicated, because when someone makes a request to you, as you mentioned, Denise, you, depending on your mood, depending on the person, you might say, sure, no problem, I can do that. Well, the problem is you haven't taken the time to really understand their request, because every request has timing issues, power issues, satisfaction issues. What would happen, what would have to happen that I would be satisfied if you said yes and you did what I asked? Conditions of satisfaction, tone of voice. There's all these elements. So what I say to slow the process down, because we're sort of addicted to these conversations, we're addicted to yes, basically, is before we say yes, ask a few questions like, okay, who is it for? Why do you want it? What's the timing? What's the format? Just not to be a smart aleck, um, but to make sure that when you say yes, you can fulfill the promise. So that's one step. And the other step is, instead of being addicted to yes, we have to understand there's more options. No should be part of our vocabulary. No should be part of our vocabulary, as uncomfortable as it is, to either protect ourselves or to be clear that, you know what, I don't make a promise I can't keep, so I have to say no. And maybe I can make the third option, which is a counteroffer, which says, I really can't do it for Monday morning, but I can do it on Wednesday. Or I really can't do it. I can't finish this paper because I don't have the expertise, but I have a colleague who can do it. And so that's the counteroffer of making a good response to a request. And if we do those things, the questions, and then consider a counteroffer before we just jump to yes, we're likely to make a much better promise that we can fulfill. And guess what? When we fulfill promises, it builds trust. Does that answer your question?
It does. And while you were talking, I wrote down, because I'm always picking, what did I hear? What did I hear? I
Mm.
heard listening. You have to listen, which means shut up and listen. And then you have to ask questions. before you
Yes.
jump into any decision. Yes, no, maybe. Maybe is always a no, by the way. But
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
you have to sit down, listen, take notes. This is how I operate anyway. Take notes, ask those questions, and then just say, let's talk a bit more about this because, and then off you go.
Right. And the reason the listening says to slow down and ask the questions, because the better you understand what they want and the better you can talk about what you can and can't do, the more likely you know they're going to receive that really well, because your intention there, the intention of doing that, is to make a good promise and build trust. It's not to be a smartass. It's to build trust and create a promise that a week from now we'll both be satisfied, and they go, oh, I could ask him to do that again because he did a great job. Yeah. So that component of slowing down a little bit and listening is key. And then asking clarifying questions and then considering your yes, no, or counteroffer.
No is, look, it's one of my favorite words. My mother insisted it was my first word. Not cat, not dog, not mom, not dad. It was no. And she said I meant
No.
it. But to me, no can be a complete sentence, but it can also be a way to help both you and the person you're saying no to for so many
Right.
reasons. If you don't have the skills or the time or the interest to do what it is that they're asking you to do, be up, be up front. I will often, and I'm a web developer by trade, and I will not horribly often, but I have been known to say, listen, I'm not the best person for this, but I can refer
Right.
you to
Right.
someone else. That way, nobody's in trouble. We're both happy. And
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
build something that's going to be a pretty boat anchor and doesn't do another darn thing.
Yeah. And you see what the move you just made, because there's multiple moves in this dance, is that you said no and you made a counteroffer. I can't do it, but I have a friend that might be able to. And that's again what you're doing is they made a request to you, you're now making a counter, you're making an offer, and then guess what, they get to say, help me understand that, does this person qualify, they get to ask clarifying questions and they get to say yes or no. So that we're in a little circle there until we get to a yes for both people.
I find that most people who are business owners and they operate like I do and you do, largely online, we have to have those counter offers ready because we cannot and should not take every offer that comes our way. And look, I
Right.
understand when you're brand new at what you do, you have to build up your portfolio. But and I've seen
Mm.
this happen in my own business. I've seen it happen in other fledgling businesses. All of a sudden, you're working your fanny off. You're not happy. You're not providing the best possible solutions because you don't really know what you're doing just yet.
Right. Yeah,
Figure it all
exactly.
out. And sometimes it's just honest to say to your potential client, listen, this is not. I had one the other day that he's
Mhm.
building in a website platform that I just don't work in. But I had some, other things that I could send him to, and he was all happy with that. And I
Yeah.
gave some
Yeah.
thoughts. Yeah, I can do this. No, I can't. I'd have to learn it. Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
was
Right.
that
Right. Right.
quick. I can do this. No, I can't. I mean, it didn't
No,
take
Dan,
any longer than that.
that's
Actually,
pretty
the
good.
answer was no, I won't. So,
No, I won't. Yeah, that's pretty good. You
yeah.
see, that's also a sign that when we investigate our stories and we investigate what we're telling ourselves or how we respond to people, what we're doing is we're increasing our self-awareness. And the more we increase our self-awareness, the more emotional intelligence and social intelligence we have, because our emotional intelligence sort of grows, and we have antennas. We can read other people. We can be in conversations in a way, in a more emotionally stable way. So you did
And
good. Yeah, that was good. Good
oh,
move on
thank
your
you.
part.
I've always done, but I did get caught in the trap very early on. So I just need to build a portfolio. Nobody knows who I am. They're not, I've got to have something to show. But I also had to learn that when I did like, basically a favor or just a seriously cut rate website for somebody, I would tell them on the
Yeah.
phone, if you ever, and I'm not joking, if you ever tell somebody I did this for that price, I will call you a liar on the village square. And they're like, no, not a problem. You know?
Won't
So,
do.
yeah, because you
Right.
don't want that following you around. Like I did this massively effective website for $500. It should have been 5,000. I'm
Oh,
exaggerating, but you get the point.
yeah. Yeah.
You get that reputation, oh,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
over.
exactly.
It's over.
That's right. Yeah. So that, yeah, so it's really crucial, this conversation. Now, the just going back to the four for a minute, we we love stories. They're good and they're can be lovely, and they're negative and they can be damaging. We sort of are addicted to our stories because our egos are attached to our perspectives and our beliefs. And so that's how we get sort of locked into our stories. And part of the book is helping us investigate them so that we can unlock. You don't have to give up your beliefs, you don't have to give up your position, but you need to understand it so you can go into collaboration. So we love our stories and we love the action conversation. We love the commitment conversations. Who's going to do what by when? Okay, we're in a meeting, there's a bunch of yabber, and someone says, okay, what's next? Boom. And someone makes a decision. Well, what happens with that sort of attraction to storytelling and attraction to commitment conversations? The middle two conversations, which are collaboration and creativity, get bypassed. So I coined the term the conversational bypass. We go from I'll tell a story, and then we go, okay, what are we going to do? And the middle two, where we're doing mutual learning, where we're being a little humble to see if how other people think and put our position forth, and the creative conversation about possibilities, those two get overlooked. And that's a fundamental problem that we have all the time. That if we could just slow down a little bit and say, okay, here's your story. Let me understand your story. Be in collaboration and be. I'm not talking about hours of time. Heck, you can do that for whatever subject. You can do it in 5 minutes. You can do it in half an hour. But you take the time to do that because in the end, you'll make a wiser decision.
Yeah, because sometimes these conversations they can go sideways. They really can. So
Mm.
is there a point where you just call a halt and say, okay, we're a little bit off track here. Let's reschedule this. These are some of the things that we talked about, but we didn't get answers for. Let's do this again tomorrow after everybody's had time to kind of read their notes and come
Mhm.
back with, better ideas. And I wouldn't say it that way, but,
Yeah.
just sometimes you have to just call a halt to it and say, let's do this again tomorrow because we have other questions.
Yeah, especially if you're the leader or the facilitator, especially if you're feeling the pressure or the rush to make a decision and it doesn't you don't feel like it's been well vetted, right? So if it's not well vetted, say, you know what, let's just slow down. We aren't like this isn't a deadline that if we don't make it today, we'll be in trouble or we'll whether it's financial or hierarchically in trouble. Let's come back tomorrow and let's have very purposeful. Let's hear each other out. Let's hear the five perspectives in the room, and let's ask each other questions about why they think that way, how they think that way, and then let's take a minute to say, okay, here's the problem. We know our different perspectives. What does that tell us about what's possible? And then to just heck, whiteboard possibilities. And it's sort of like brainstorming, but the trouble with brainstorming is we don't put the judgments aside. We Someone will put an idea up on the whiteboard and someone says, oh, we tried that 2 years ago, it'll never work. Well, that shuts down the conversation. So the idea is let's just take what are the possibilities, and then with good thinking, teams or leaders often go, oh, I here are the possibilities, and given the circumstances, number three is really feeling in my gut, like in my intuition, creatively, uh, and also there's a lot of data supporting it. That makes sense. Let's go with number three. So to do those things purposefully uh, takes some effort, takes a little bit of education to tell people what you're doing, what you're trying to do, but you end up with a better result.
Tuition in the book, and I'm glad you do because I don't know about you, but I tend to follow my gut more often than anything. Yeah, I
Right.
think as humans, if we're paying any attention at all, we're paying attention to our spidey sense. We can tell when something might be a little bit off or it's just not going to work for us, or we're flat ass being lied to, excuse the language.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
can
yeah.
we can feel it if
Yeah.
we're paying attention. And I'll be honest with you, Chuck, if I'm listening to somebody and all of a sudden I realize that I'm clutching my stomach,
Hmm.
uh-oh,
Yeah. Something's going on. And that's
yeah,
the truth. That's the thing about, intuition. Usually your body is ahead of your head. You know, for some people, it might be clenching their stomach. For other people, their shoulders might hunch. I tend to get, I sort of, I was thinking about when I get threatened, my mouth dries up, but that's a different issue. But our bodies are ahead of our brain. So if you get a signal, listen to it. It's your gut telling you something. And unfortunately, through business and stuff, I think that sort of the value of that has been sort of trained out of us. It's there though. You don't have to create it. You just have to uncover it.
exactly. And you mentioned something early on at the top of the hour that you were talking about collaborative mastermind collaborations, actually. And
Hmm.
I wrote down mastermind. Listen, you can mastermind with just one other person.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
those are so important because if we're doing it consciously, we're having all of these different types of conversations that you're talking about, maybe with one other person, possibly with two other people. But if you're sitting back and you're listening, you're asking questions, you're writing down the answers, and you can always say, listen, I'm going to digest this. Can we convene tomorrow? But
Yeah.
you've given
Yeah.
everybody an opportunity to be part of a mastermind. And listen, as brilliant as we all think we are, we cannot do it on our own.
Yeah. Exactly. No, I'm a drummer too, a percussionist, and I learned early on that I'm a much better drummer when I'm dancing with my other music partners, and I'm not just listening to myself, but I'm listening to the piano and the guitar and the bass and and that so jazz or just music is a good analogy for the importance of collaboration and intuition in the moment in real time, to just be that present. Now there's one thing I want to mention in the book, not only the four conversations but the four archetypal elements of conversations, that the reason they're so critical, well, not critical, the reasons they're so important and helpful is that when we need to state a position or perspective, or we need to ask questions of other people's perspective, these four elements really can help us get under the surface. I hate this, or I love that, or I want this to happen, or I want that to happen. We can get underneath, and that's where we can do the mutual learning. That's where we can ask the questions about the four elements, which are what do you want? What are your desires? What are you concerned about? What do you, because concerns are about the future, um, about tomorrow not being the same as today. What are power issues? If we're in a hierarchy and you're having a conversation with a boss, you better be aware of the power issues. You might not like them, but you should be aware of them. But there's power issues with kids. There's power issues with parents. There's power issues with partners and husbands and wives and friends and colleagues. So it's always there. And then the last one is every conversation we have and judgment we have is based on standards that we have about what's right, what's wrong, how something should be, how something should be done, how someone should lead, how someone should talk, how someone should do X. And pretty much 80% of those standards we didn't even consciously choose. We adopted them from our family, our culture, and our belief systems. So those four things: desires, concerns, power issues, and standards become like a recipe for how to ask good questions. Because if you're in a tough conversation, you go, well, help me understand your concerns.
Yeah, say those again. I caught desires, concerns. What was the others?
Authority/power issues, which
Okay,
are in
good.
every conversation, even with a friend. Some friends you give their voice more power than other friends.
Right.
Um, and then the last one is standards. So literally, how do we measure success? How do we measure uh, a decision? Because I have a standard, you might have a different standard. We can be in a battle and realize that um, we can be in a battle and go head to head, or we could have a conversation. Of, well, what are your standards? Why do you think that that's the better way to go? Tell me your how you measure what your judgment is. I had an event with a neighbor recently where it wasn't very pretty because I asked a very small favor and they just said no. But I was triggered because, from my standard, what a good neighbor and fairness and kindness means is to, if it's no skin off your back, help a neighbor out. And they just wouldn't do it. And, for me, that was like, oh, wow. So they just have a different standard. I can't change that. I don't have any power over them, but it was tough for me to swallow. So standards are huge and they're every part of every conversation. They're certainly every part of every conflict we're in.
Talking about conversations with other people, but Chuck, I'll tell you, the most toxic conversations I have ever had have been with myself. And I seriously, and I'll
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
you right now, if anybody at all spoke to me in a Walmart parking lot the way I sometimes speak to myself, I would need bail money. I would be in jail.
Yeah,
So we have
totally.
to have those conversations with ourselves. So, what did you just say? What? Where did that come from?
What do you mean, my interaction with my neighbor?
No, no, me when I'm talking to
Oh, you. Oh,
myself.
yes, yes, yes,
Look,
yes, yes.
it can get
Well, yeah,
ugly because I have big words and I use them.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, and nasty words. So yeah, I think that's part of the what I talk about investigating our stories, investigating there's public conversations, what we say out loud, and there's private conversations, which is our internal dialogue, um, the chatter, the monkey mind, all those things that are, as my sister calls it, the committee inside. Um, and
putting that down, the committee and
Yes, right. Thank you, committee. Many, many members of the committee. And in the book, that's really an important distinction because when we are triggered and we are feeling upset about a conversation, guaranteed you have a private conversation going on that is really keeping you off balance, keeping you from being self-aware and recognizing some part of it that you could shift. And so I lay out this exercise, which was developed by Chris Argyris um, at the Harvard Business School many years ago, like 30 years ago. Um, it wasn't received well then, but it's become more common in language and leadership teachings. You take a piece of paper and you divide it in half, and the right side you say, okay, Denise, I said, what do you think about the project, or what do you think about our possibility working together? And the other person said, it's too soon to tell. I don't know enough. And then the other person says, well, we only have a week to decide and we should probably get on it because we're running out of time. And the other person says, well, let's talk to the boss about it. Or I'm making a scenario up. But you write down what the conversation was as it were transcribed, as if it were taped and transcribed. And then on the left side of the paper, you go back and write what you were thinking and feeling while you were talking and while the other person was talking. And you'll say, what do you think about the project? And what you're thinking is, we are in trouble. This project is so late, so over budget, blah, blah, blah. But I can't believe he is freaking doing this to me because he's not pulling his weight. That's a private conversation. And then he says it's too soon to tell. And my private conversation is, yeah, I'll say, because you don't have a goddamn clue. You know.
see, I'm in that conversation with you. So keep going.
Yeah.
I'm the
And
bully in the corner.
yeah. And then he says it's too soon to tell. I said, well, maybe we should talk to Bob or Jamie, the boss, because she might have a perspective, or maybe she needs to know that we're running out of time and running out of budget. And I'm thinking, if I don't get some support from the boss, this guy is going to, we're never going to make the deadline, and I need to talk to him. This guy doesn't have a clue. And then he says, well, go ahead. We're going to be fine. I know we're going to finish this. So that distinction between the private and the public, the larger the gap is between what we're thinking privately and what we're saying publicly, the more stress we're living in. There's a stress gap there.
The conversation you're having, because you're having this internal conversation, that's showing up in the air above the bubble above your head.
Yeah. Your body's also, your body doesn't lie.
Yeah. No.
Your eyes don't lie. So now the other person might be clueless. They might not have enough emotional or social intelligence to read the clues from you, but others might. But yeah, it's all being broadcast. So the idea is not to beat ourselves up about the private conversation, because I've done this exercise with hundreds of people. They do the exercise. They don't know where I'm going with it. And then I say, okay, do this exercise. Okay, so what was in the private conversation? Swear words, judgment, negativity, disbelief, all these negative things. And so I say, okay, so what do we do with that? And if you just blurt it out, which is like just dumping your toxic conversation, your toxic private conversation, you can do a lot of damage. You do a lot of damage to the relationship, to hurt the other person's feeling. You might feel good, but you're going to do a lot of damage. Well, what's the other option? Well, the other option is to hold it in. Well, how healthy is that, to have all this crap inside that we're not processing? And so what my experience and my practice has been for many years is, how do I process that toxicity? And what I do, I use, okay, what did I want? What are my desires? What did I want? What were my concerns? What are the power issues? And what are my standards? And if I ask those questions of my private, even one of my private conversations, like, he's such an idiot and we'll never get done with this project. If I just ask those questions of those thoughts that I had, I will find that, oh, I have a legitimate concern, and my standard of what success for this project is and his are different. Now I'm processing that so I can turn it into gold, so I can turn it into a productive part of a conversation. And that means that then the next conversation with him, or the next conversation with the boss, I'm less divided, stressed, because I have a sense of why I'm thinking, how I'm thinking, what I want. And I can bring that forth, which is quieting the private conversation. Excuse me. So there's a real benefit to taking the time. Yeah.
There is, Chuck, and you can, just listening to the conversation that you're having in your head, I've had those same conversations. And all of a sudden I realize that I'm getting really antagonistic.
Yeah.
And it's not smart. It just
right.
It goes nowhere. This guy is never going to want to deal with me again, even if I didn't actually say it. He knows, he knows. So I love the idea of write it down, process it. I don't know how you process things. I look at it and then I start scribbling. And then I go cook something. I may go make a gumbo. I have to walk away for a little while.
Walk away.
Yeah. But then when I come back to it, I've had time to think, relax, breathe, and go, let me go back to that. That's not what I thought it was, I don't think.
And
I'm one of those walk away people. Just walk away for a bit.
Yeah, and even, writing it down, and even if you walk away, you say, well, then that's what I love about these 4 simple elements: desires, concerns, authority, power, and standards. Because even while you're making your gumbo, you can go, well, what am I really concerned about? Why am I so worried about this? And you might get a revelation, or you might go, you know what? I want a result of success, and he doesn't seem to understand. He doesn't even seem to get what I want. So I need to talk about that. So we have these little revelations, but can totally redesign the next conversation. And I say redesign purposefully because it's like we do a little bit of work, then we can shift things around and go, you know what? I can have a better conversation.
Once you write it all down, or however it is that you're going to process it,
Right.
whether it's internal, you have a conversation. I talk to my ceiling fans a lot. I do. I will be looking at, especially when I'm going to, I don't sleep a whole lot. So when I know that I'm actually going to be able to fall asleep, I will look up to my ceiling fan and I will say, this really had me running circles today. Can you
You let me
provide?
spinning.
Yeah,
You let me spinning.
that's exactly right. And I will literally turn over whatever it is that's just got me riled up to my subconscious for review. And I'm telling this to my ceiling fan out loud because you don't know who's
Yeah.
listening. I live alone, but you don't know who's listening.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Exactly.
God, spirit, the cat, I don't know. Somebody's going to pay attention. And I'm
Yeah.
telling you, check at 318 before I've had a chance to make an ass of myself with a client
Yeah.
or with a friend. 318, that answer pops up. I wake up enough, I write it down, I may get up and go do something. I don't sleep. Sleep is not one of my higher skills, but
Mm-hmm.
I walk away and then I turn it over to my subconscious, who always has the response. Always,
Mm-hmm.
100% of
Yeah.
the time. So
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to say, I can't do this right now. But with that comes a lot of creativity because now you're like, oh, okay, I did not see it that way. But back
Mm-hmm.
into your mastermind or your conversation, now you're a bit more creative with how you can approach these things.
Yeah, you see, you take it apart a little bit and go, well, what are my concerns? What are my desires? What do I want? That's the revelatory part. And then the ideas go, oh, I can do this instead of that. I can tell them X
Right.
instead of Y, you know.
Yeah.
And that really is a part of opening our minds and our heart, you know. I often one metaphor I really like. I get metaphors and analogies confused. I shouldn't do that because I work in language. But when if you go into a conversation with a closed fist, like, you know, I believe this, it has to be this way. I know I'm right. Uh, you go into a closed fist. What other people come to the conversation with their story and with their closed fist. Well, you know, we're already in a battle. We're more likely to become defensive because we don't want to really hear what they have to say because we have our mind made up already. What I like about the four elements and asking ourselves a few questions is you don't have to journal for 10 pages. You just, you know, ask yourself a few questions. You open your hand in the conversation. So instead of coming in with a closed fist, you open your hand and you go, here's why I'm concerned. Here's what my standards of success are, what my measure of success is. I know, you know, we're colleagues. So there's, you know, I think we need some authority to help us make this decision. And really, what I want this project to succeed. And I'm concerned about where we are financially and where we are in the timeline. That you go into the conversation with an open hand, you're willing to reveal the thinking under your position. And you know what that takes? That takes humility. And that takes a little bit of vulnerability.
Well,
And
and
ironically, if we do that, it's it's sort of in, you know, you're saying to the other person, come on, open your hand. Give me a little bit here.
people can understand that you're authentic in your concerns. And this is
Right.
why you have these concerns. They're like, oh, and all of a
Mm.
sudden, their internal voice goes, hang on a second, maybe I wronged this person. Maybe he or she is not the idiot that I said she was yesterday.
Yeah.
And on
Yeah. Yeah.
page 51, chapter 4, this is the
Mm.
chapter about processing our opinions, which is kind of what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you've got this great quote from Marcus Aurelius: today I escaped from anxiety, or no, I discarded it because it was within me, in my own
Right.
perceptions, not outside. And I think that is so important to remember because, listen, the toxic voices that we're hearing are our own. Get
That's
out
right.
of your
Yeah.
own way.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, just don't, there, you know, there's a beautiful work done called voice dialogue, and neuroscience now is caught up to it, that our voices inside are voices they develop to support us, to help us through difficult things. I had a rough family life, so I developed all these kind of funny things to protect myself. But as I became adult, I realized I didn't need them. Now, what we know through neuroscience and mind studies, brain studies, is that we don't need to get rid of, we don't need to judge and beat up and try to exorcise our demons. We need to look at them and say, "Oh, wow! So you're trying to help me out, but right now I don't need your help." So we actually can create a relationship with some of our negative voices instead of beating ourselves up over having them.
More often than I like to admit. And I'll have something pop up from when I was a child, and I'll recognize, hey, this was when I was 5 years old. Why are you
Absolutely.
still hanging around? So I will say, and you're going to think I'm a total lunatic, I will be talking again to my ceiling fan. I might be in the living room. I might be, it doesn't matter where
Yeah,
I am. I'm in the
yeah.
South. We have ceiling fans everywhere. But
I love
we
ceiling fans.
do.
I'm in the north and I love ceiling fans.
Oh man, I've got to have moving air. But I will say out loud, okay, I'm hearing you. I don't like it. Go take a seat.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's the end of it. They're like, well, okay,
yeah.
I'll
The
back
only
off
thing I
over
would
here
add to
until you
that,
need me.
yeah, the only thing I would add to that is a little bit of empathy. Thank you. You've helped me in the past, but right now I don't need you. You know,
You're just a
um,
nicer person than I am.
no, that's being nicer to your little girl that's saying, "What the hell's going on here?"
And
You
I'm just
know,
saying, go take a seat.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Because you see what they have their own history and they have their own ego. And so when you push on them, they just bristle and get defensive. So you say, you know what? I appreciate you. I even love you, but right now I don't need you.
okay, I'm going to try it your way because they do keep popping up. So
Yeah.
apparently I'm doing something wrong. But, and
Good.
that does make sense. But once you identify those, you're like, huh, I
Yeah.
was 5 years old. I was 10 years old. What the heck?
Yeah,
Do I need this
absolutely.
anymore? Absolutely not. Well, not
Yeah.
today
I,
anyway. Bye bye.
not today. Oh, it's it. I think I know that in the book I tell the story about I grew up with a redneck grandfather, and I grew up with a story planted by my grandfather in my brain that I wasn't a big enough man because I didn't like to skin the deer. I didn't like to do X, Y, and Z. I had
Um,
sisters that cried, but when I cried, I was just not a big enough man. I grew up with that story in my private conversation. You're not big enough. You're not strong enough. You're not this. You're not that. And I never busted that till I was like 30 years old. I never got a handle on that, the
what made you
untruth of that
say,
story.
yeah, what made you say this is not true? I no longer need this story.
Yeah. So when I changed careers from architecture to I studied the ontology of language. Uh, One of the exercises was we all have master stories about ourselves. Some that really serve us well. I had a grandmother who thought I walked on water, so I have positive stories about myself. But the negative master stories that were holding me back, not a big enough man. Um, we had to do an exercise where we had to, deconstruct those stories. What are the facts? Is it true? How does it make you feel? And when you do that, I realized, wait a minute, I'm 6 feet tall. I have a beautiful wife. I have two sons. I'm a successful architect. I'm about to change careers, or I'm changing careers. None of those facts add up to any one my standards of what it means to be a big man or a good man. So what the story was my grandfather's standard, and I don't blame him because that's what he learned.
Right.
You have to, as a man, you don't cry. As a man, you don't show your emotions. As a man, you love to go hunting and you love skinning the deer. As a man, you don't do this. Those were his standards, and I unconsciously adopted them because I was a young boy and I gave his voice a lot of authority. Now you see how all the dots start connecting. There's authority issues and there's his standards, and all of a sudden I read, wait a minute, I don't have to live by his standards. I can live by my standards of what it means to be a successful, powerful man. That was a huge, huge
Yeah.
shift for me.
And I'm so glad you told that story because I grew up with a father. Well, he left when I was 13, and we all just kind of said, "Oh, thank God." But
Yeah.
we did. It's a very sad
Yeah.
thing, but it was not a happy home.
Yeah.
And we were told constantly, girls and boys, you don't show emotion, you don't cry. You're gonna cry, I'll give you something to cry about.
Yeah.
And I was
Exactly.
always
Yeah.
very quiet. I was the only introvert in a house of really loud,
Oh,
boisterous people. But
wow.
Chuck, when he hit the door, we had to go to our rooms. And
Yeah.
it could be 5 o'clock at night, it could be after the pub closed. I don't know, but he
Yep.
didn't want to see us or hear us. And I grew up with that.
Yeah. 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 And that seeps into your unconscious mind and
It
your the
did.
bones of your body.
It took me
You
the
know,
longest kind of time to figure out that I was a pretty decent person.
that's right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I
It's
like me
so
now. You
yeah,
know?
it's so powerful. Yeah, I think I ended up still telling a story in the book about what happened was once I got a handle on this, it was his story, not my story, and I can have my own story. Um, I went into the office. I was still practicing architecture, and the partner, one of my partners was the founding partner. We were having coffee. His name was Bill. We were having coffee, and it's the first time I was standing there having coffee with Bill. And inside my head, I said, "Holy shit, I'm taller than Bill." And up to that moment, I never saw myself taller than other men.
Oh
That's
no.
how that's how powerful that story was. I saw myself smaller,
Yeah.
less, less,
Yeah.
le- you know,
Less than.
and
I
that
get
was
it.
revelatory. That was like an enlightening moment. Holy shit. Oh, yeah. Anyway, so powerful stuff that's
Amazing.
embedded in
It
our
is.
stories and embedded in our conversations. Yeah.
And it's time to, get a shovel, get a power tool, get it out of there. Get it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Understand
Yeah.
it's not your story. It was never your story. It was
Right.
somebody else's standards. And
Yeah.
God bless
Well, you
them.
know what we're
Let them.
going to do? And we're going to get a big damn flashlight. And we're going to shine a light on it.
Exactly
So
right.
it
You
can't live in the
sound
dark.
you sound like me, because when I was a kid, if I did watch TV, it was always, mysteries. And when I was a kid, I was reading murder mysteries. And I've
Well,
still got this picture in my head of, somebody, one of those old black and white noir movies where somebody is shining a light and saying, "You're going to tell me, you're going to." I still have that picture in my head. So, and I will do it. And I say that for a reason because I will sometimes sit myself down. Denise, go have a seat. And I will shine that light on myself, and it is uncomfortable,
yeah,
but it has
totally.
to be done.
But it's freeing. I mean, you might have to look at things you don't want to look at, but ultimately, if you can let them go, you're freer. You're more enlightened. You're more, you can say, "This is who I want to be in the world. This is who I am in the world." In fact,
Show up in the world because how we all showed up in the world when we were teens, very different. Because let's
right,
face it, we didn't have a brain in our head. And then how we showed up in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 70s, wherever we are, we're different. Every decade, I think we change quite a bit. So
quite a bit. Yeah.
we're always changing, we're always growing. Hopefully, we're always growing and helping other people. Chuck, we're out of time. Can you believe? Um,
Great.
thank you for sharing
Thank
your
you.
truly inspiring journey and your insights. And before we close, is there
Mhm.
anything else that you'd like to share with our audience? And where can people connect with you and where can they find your book?
Yeah, I'd say, just the four things out of the book are: don't, your stories aren't the truth. Um, you know, uh, you know, uh, with other people, seek to understand before you judge. The third one is trust your intuition. And the fourth one is don't make promises you can't keep. And we can do all of those by learning to fall in love with questions.
Right. Don't make
Um,
promises you can't keep to yourself either. Those are the worst.
right. Exactly. Yeah. I'll never eat that ice cream again. Um,
Yeah,
um,
right.
yeah, right. Anyway, so I am on LinkedIn, Chuck _Wisner, Instagram, same. My website is chuckwisner.com. They can get a free PDF of the introduction to the book. The book is on Amazon, and you can order at your local bookstore. My real goal in all of this is just to get it into more hands. And I love doing speaking engagements. So if there's anybody out there that wants to, that my work resonates with what they're doing in their world, let me know by email through my website.
Listen, everybody, as we wrap up this discussion on the DNA of conversations with Chuck Wisner, and I pronounced your name wrong earlier, Chuck, I'm so sorry. It's clear that understanding the dynamics of our interactions is essential for building meaningful connections. And we explored the 4 key types of conversations, each serving a distinct purpose in how we communicate. And he highlighted those roles in shaping our relationships. Storytelling stood out as a very powerful tool, showing how the narratives we share can foster deeper understanding and empathy. And that's a word that we're seeing a lot of, empathy, EQ. And we've also discussed the conversational bypass trap, which is, seriously, go listen to that and listen again, take notes, stressing the importance of active listening and genuine engagement to avoid miscommunication. And then finally, we examined commitment conversations, emphasizing their role in building trust and strengthening both personal and professional relationships. And his book, The Art of Conscious Conversations, can be found on Amazon, and I highly recommend you make it part of your entrepreneurial library. So if you enjoyed this episode, this conversation, and found value in Chuck's insights, please take a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And this is why your feedback helps me reach more listeners and continue delivering insightful conversations. And until next time, keep embracing your journey and creating meaningful connections and conversation. Chuck, again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the good conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffiths at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.